Hello, everyone. My name is Sam Prichard. I am the marketing manager at Major Events International, and today I'm very happy to be joined by Alistair Turner from NOEA. Alistair, do you want to introduce yourself and what you're about and everything?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Yeah, my name is Alistair Turner. I work as marketing counsel for the National Outdoor Events Association, which is one of the leading associations for the outdoor events industry in the UK.
Brilliant, brilliant. So, what I first want to start with is how you have an extensive career in marketing over 20 years, and how did you first become involved with NOAA, and what drew you to the organisation, and how has your role evolved since you first joined? Or are you still doing the same sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's funny. The events industry, anyone will tell you, there's more so now, but back in the day, not many people kind of went for events. Events kind of went for them, and they got dragged into it. And then suddenly, it's like a
Mm.
spider's web, and sort of like a drug where you just can't get enough of it and you get dragged into it and you can't get enough. And then suddenly you're woke up and you're 20 years in the events industry. And I don't think I'm the first person, both in the
Yeah.
marketing capacity or in the organizing capacity, that's happened to. I think university, we're an industry that loves what we do.
Mm.
I understand associations and always sort of understood working with associations, obviously marketing as well. And again, it's been a nice long journey through the evolution of National Outdoor Events Association. CEO Susan Tanner, when I started my business, wanted to talk to me about positioning NOAA, trying to get it closer to its members, trying to represent and reflect its membership and members' needs. Looking at its brand, just simply how
Mm.
it spoke, how it talked to its major stakeholders, which is its members, which is the government of the UK and the people that go to events, which is a lot of people, and to construct messages and understand causes and make effects that would benefit all those three people mutually, but mostly for the good of the long-term future of the events industry.
Yeah. Well, as we know, the event industry is quite an unpredictable sector. It's always changing. It's always seemed to increasing more and more challenges. So when you first joined, has the message, I imagine has it completely changed since you first involvement and evolved? It's not always the same message you're putting out. Like, how has that message changed?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It hasn't. It hasn't. I mean, I think the first thing to say is the event industry is by its nature incredibly tenuous. We are at the behest of a bad day's weather or a
Mm.
COVID pandemic. But what we can't do is accept that as something we're just going to have to cope with. So with NOAA, what we always wanted to do was try and build the bedrock of the events industry to as stable a place as possible. So things like commercial success and commercial acumen, talent, which we can talk forever about on this course, talent,
Mm.
things like getting insurances placed in there, getting good working relationships between event suppliers and event organizers, all of those sort of things provide a bedrock, which means when things go wrong,
Mm.
which they do, and
Yeah.
Murphy's law of events, there is a bedrock to fall back on. And I guess answering your question is the message has changed as we've evolved. I
Yeah.
would argue, not just because of NOAA, just but because of lots of different things, that the events industry is so much more stable and more robust than it's ever been.
Mm.
What's changed is the different winds, backwinds that are affecting it all the time as well at the moment, because we've gone from pandemic and
Yeah.
swine flu and all those other stuff and weather to a whole new raft of situations which are about economics and pricing and large event production and all
Mm.
those other stuff. So whilst the same message is true, we need to be
Yeah. Yeah.
robust. The second message is, Christ, what's going to be thrown at us this summer?
Mm. Exactly. I mean, we touched on it there a little bit in terms of the pandemic. Obviously, the pandemic had I can't really think of an industry maybe more that the pandemic had a great effect on than the events. It seems it's still, like you said just before the interview, two festivals are shutting down. It seems all the time. It's just this thing. No one can have any money. It had a massive effect. And what strategies do you think will be most effective in rebuilding confidence amongst people who want to put on events and people who want to come to events? Like, what new message do we have to put out there to rebuild that confidence of people that know events are all good and mm,
Sort of two or three things, really. I mean, I think the first thing is talent, right? What we've
mm,
done is we have ceased to become an employer of choice.
mm,
You ask parents out there whether they think that their kids going into the events industry is a viable career option for them, and
mm,
many will say no, whereas
yeah,
beforehand they'd be less inclined to do so. So we need to do two things around sort of talent. A, we need to produce ourselves as a much, much better career option, which means we need to do start shedding things like zero-hour top contracts. It means we need to start having career pathways. It means we need to invest in training. It means we need to do all those things because the natural inclination to join the event industry is there. It's a great, creative, interesting, productive purpose. What we need to do is build the career around that. And if we do that, we'll get the best talent. And if we do get the best talent, then suddenly we become that more sort of robust. We also, what we need to do, and I think this is something we're talking in our own convention about, but something we touch in your meeting, is about diversity of talent as well. What you find is the events industry is such a great place to get disenfranchised, different, unrepresented people from around the country. The reality is we're not very good at that. Holistically, we're not very good at that. It's very event specific to event specific. Holistically, as an industry, we need to be much better about reaching all corners of the events industry as well. And I think the third one around that as well is the relationships within the events industry at the moment. We are hanging on to a phenomenal amount of historic debt. Every time an event doesn't happen, it builds up debt. A lot of this debt has now become government debt because of the bailouts, the money we spent during the pandemic. And the reality is what we've got is this real different situation where we're trying to pay off that debt while still having events. At the same time, everyone's trying to do that. So the cost of events are going up. And we're getting ourselves into a bit of a vicious circle, which we seem a little bit unable to get ourselves out of. And that's why these festivals that are closing at the moment, I would say a vast majority of them are still pandemic casualties, despite the fact that we're over 3 years into the pandemic. And I think it's that financial knot that we're in at the moment that's causing us a lot of problems.
Okay, yeah. So do you think since the pandemic, the wider audience, the wider general population, do you think they have a different view and different expectations now from outdoor events? So they, if they are, if they're not, do you think people are expecting different types of experience now to go to events compared to pre-pandemic?
Yeah, you can get me all academic about this one. So like what I could do is, there is this thing called the experience economy, which is basically because of higher rental prices, higher mortgage prices and things like that. People would much rather buy an experience, whether it's a spa day or a day at the golf or a season ticket to watch their local rugby team, whatever it is, than buy a consumable good that they don't earn. Which means this is a good time for people to want to go out and have great experiences at festivals, events, shows, whatever it's going to be. So there's a macro effect. At the same time, this is an entirely price restricted industry. So we've got our cost of living crisis, high inflation. Okay, that's coming down a little bit, but we've still also got events agencies and event producers that are trying to recoup money back and event suppliers that are trying to recoup money back. So at the same time, our prices are going up. The price of putting on an event is exponentially higher than it's ever been. So at the same time as consumers need them to be as cheap as possible. Otherwise, what we do is we price out a generation of mostly younger people out of our events industry, which would be an incredible tragedy. But the reality is the event has to pass that cost on to someone. So what you're kind of doing is if we're kind of going in a rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer sort of situation in the events industry, which is causing this gulf. The sort of like where that's sort of falling is niche events seem to be doing very well. So those niche festivals that have a very, very committed core of people seem to do very, very well. And then the big boys are doing great. It's the bit in between, this really important bit in the between, which is the growth sort of area that's not doing so well. And to be fair, that's where a lot of the SMEs are. That's where a lot of the employment is and things like that. So we need to sort of protect our ambitious growth events.
Yeah, because I'm leading on to the next question I was going to ask. Because we have the big festivals like your Glastonbury's, your Readings, who seem to be fine, or not fine, but from the outside it seems to be okay. Then you have
comparatively,
but it's like I want to focus on, especially on the smaller festivals, maybe local events like towns all across the UK. What message do we need to put out to them? Like, how do they build a strong like fan base in case in such a marketplace where you're dominated by these big festivals? How do you think since the pandemic, how's that changed for them?
Well, first of all, I'd say you should come along to the MEI conference where that will be very heavily discussed, basically, right? I would put my plug in for that one because what we've got is two examples of excellent events who can talk to you about why those specific niche market local events are succeeding. And the reason, without giving too much away, is by sticking to their niches and sticking to those local markets. The other thing that goes back to one of those issues I talked about earlier is they understand their relationships. They bought their outside supply circles, their outside production circles, as close as possible to their event. There is a true collaboration there. There's not a you do this and I'll do that, or a you screw me and I'll screw you back sort of thing.
Yeah.
There is a genuine collaboration, which means all those price differentials, those important things, they can work through that. So what they've got is they've got a core base of attendees that they're not going to let down, and they've got a core base of people around them they're not going to get down. You ask both of those people that are on the panel and anyone around it, that you know what the toughest thing is? It's when you scale.
Yeah.
So you try and scale that, then you water everything down, and that's when these people come into problem. And that is the next issue for the events industry. But yeah, that sort of seems to be the magic sauce. But I'll let them explain that a lot better than I do.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, because it does seem almost stretching yourself too thin, trying to grow too quickly, and then losing control of those relationships that you've had because you tried to grow or what have you. So yeah, I mean, as we said, the past 5 years have seen massive change in the event industry. What do you think over the next 5 to 10 years? What do you think, in your perspective, are going to be the most important things affecting the event industry? Is there what in your perspective? Yeah, 5 to 10 years, what we're going to be looking like?
I mean, and this is a very personal thing to me, I have a real issue around us pricing out a generation. And a real issue. I mean, I think if you take something like, if you take the dynamics of the events industry at the moment, I'm a Swiftie, you've got Taylor Swift charging, a lot of money in terms of a concert, and injecting what can only be described as a fantastic impetus into the events industry. However, for every ticket that someone buys to Taylor Swift, they're not buying 2 or 3 local events, right? So this is the rich and the poor, right? What you've also got is that person only gets to go to one event. If they can't afford anything else, they get to go to one event, and that's it. And I think that's a real shame, because what I want is I want them to go to Taylor Swift. I want them to do that and have those amazing experiences. I also want them to go to the local events and get enriched in that sort of way as well, which injects money into local communities and local businesses and all that sort of thing. So my thinking is if it continues to divide like this, and those prices keep on getting passed on to the consumer, it means going to an event is going to be an elitist activity. It's not going to be an accessible activity. And I think that's a real concern, because I think what we'll be doing is, if we're talking in 5 to 10 years, all those people that would have been invigorated by their first event, and every single person on the planet can remember the first local event they went to,
I think
it touches them in a deep and profound way,
yes,
we will have lost them. And I think that's a real problem. So I think that if there was a macro problem, that would be it. That, and the second thing, which NOEA will never ever stop talking about, is talent.
Yes,
we've got to get our talent back into this industry. I mean, the events industry in the UK is one of the best in the world. It really is globally the best, but we cannot stay. There's not a lot of us around that. We need to keep getting this talent back in. Sorry, I got excited there, Sam.
No, that's such a good point, because we've seen it in the past few years with Ticketmaster, putting these ridiculous prices and things, and whose responsibility does it come when it gets too ridiculous? Is it these big brands, or is it going to start having to be the government coming in being like, look guys, we can't keep on whacking these prices up, because like you're saying, all these bad things will happen. So who do you think's responsibility it is? Because it seems like the big guys aren't doing much about it, and it seems like the government has to come and step in. Where do you think that's going to go in terms of that? Is it going to be the government have to regulate it more, or?
Yeah, I mean, and I think the reality is, and we've seen the Oasis ticket coming on. We've seen people like Ed Sheeran being very vocal about how his tickets are being sold, and all the talent are out there. And that what that does is it creates a massive wall of awareness and light being shone, not always positively and not always fairly, onto our industry. But what it does is it suddenly turns around and says, if you can't regulate yourself, then we will regulate you for you. And that's down to people like NOEA and other associations within this space to sit there and say, I'm of the opinion that I don't want the government to have to regulate the events industry. I think we should be more than capable of doing that ourselves. If we aren't, though, and the collective we, then we've got to be ready for that backlash, right? If we're not responsible enough or able to collaborate enough together, then we should expect a backlash from the government and turn around and say, well, if you can't sort yourself out. And I'll tell you what, the first will be a lot better than the second, because if that second comes in, there'll be a lot of event organisers getting tied up in a huge amount of red tape around this sort of stuff. I do have a real respect for a lot of the talent that's fighting back around this sort of stuff as well, that are being very specific about how they want their tickets sold and things like that. And I hope that will help regulate it. But again, that's at a very large scale level. What about the smaller guys? Who's protecting that smaller town and the small event organisers, stuff like that? Again, that's where we as an industry collectively need to be perhaps a lot stronger and hold ourselves more accountable.
I think that's so true from my very short career in the event industry. What I've kind of noticed is I think the collaboration between everyone, no matter if you're Glastonbury or some village folk festival or something like that, I think collaboration from all levels is the best way for success. It's collaborating between organisers, sponsors, governing bodies, suppliers, everything you say. If everyone's collaborating, working towards the ultimate goal, I think that's the most effective way of doing it. And like you say, if we can not have the government to step in, it would be great because we can do it. And I think you're right. The events industry is more than capable of doing it. It's just how do we foster that collaboration? I think that's the aim of the event summit is how do we foster collaboration for all members of the events industry to put on better events. That's the key message, I think.
Yeah, no, I can agree. I mean, look, we're a really responsible events industry, and you know, despite big news stories and things like that, you will never be more safer at an event in the UK as you will in any other country in the world. You know, our safety people, our production people are sent around the world to produce events everywhere. You know, we are a gold standard of that sort of stuff. I think creatively as well, we're very, very strong. I think, I think it'd be unfair to profess that we're more creative than everyone else. But you know what? I think we do really great creative industry niche events that are culturally significant of our time and space. And I think that's great as well. I think where perhaps I could criticize this is when things go wrong, we tend to eat ourselves. And that happened in COVID, understandably, right? I mean, God, what more pressure could you imagine? But also we have, you know, big global organizations that have taken over big chunks of the events industry that, you know, don't have that sort of localized, touchy-feely, you know, hand-on-heart, collaborative sort of space that perhaps some of the younger ones can. So when things go wrong, it becomes a sort of like a battle of the fittest rather than, you know, a joined up, let's help each other out in the long-term sort of process. We are still, I think we still untangling some relationships that really went sour over COVID and since COVID. And they understandably built on by financial fiscal pressure. But there's some real big relationships that went sour. And that's really hard to untangle. There's a legacy of pain that's quite difficult to get on. And you need those vicious circles to become virtuous to build something as complex as an event ecosystem.
Yeah, that's so true. So as we look ahead, for you, what excites you about the future of the industry? Is there any upcoming trends or things or innovations that you're like, oh, I think this is really going to take off. This is going to really help the industry as a whole?
I think the two threats, the two opportunities for me. I think the first is I would love to see us becoming a more equitable and diverse industry. And that's not to say it's not across, but I want it to become a much more not just welcoming but professionalized industry for people that need jobs, ex-offenders, poor people who are poor. You know, we need to be really good at finding creative excellence from across society and making them feel both welcome and respected and give them career pathways. And I think if we do that, our events qualities will go up exponentially and will become a real beacon for what can be done. So I think that's really, really important. And I think the second one is, you know, I talk about these niche small events in almost patronizing way. These are the lifeblood of the events industry.
Yeah.
If you take some of the stuff that we at the fair have been saying and placemaking, they're the ones that are going to inject life back into local communities. There are cities and towns in the UK that are relying on those events to bring their communities together. They're really good things. And we're not talking just about small folk festivals or small dance festivals or local food festivals. We're talking all these sort of things putting together, growing in local towns side by side with the local employees and the local businesses and the local government and all that sort of stuff. And I think those things should create a network of excellence across the country. That could be something really, really exciting for the events industry, not just for those events specifically, but for the way people see events as a way of interaction with the local communities. I think that could be really exciting. And by the way, it's happening. And COVID got in the way. We're now back. I'd love to see it happening again.
Yeah, well, that's good. I think as you say, the massive setback of COVID hasn't helped, but it's starting to take shape again. These things are happening.
Yes.
So yeah, I think in the next 5 to 10 years, I can only see the event industry growing and becoming more successful. But yeah,
Yes,
thank you
absolutely.
very much for talking to me, Alistair. You can find
Pleasure, Sam.
Alistair at the event summit on the 8th of October. I'll put all the links down below. We'll be talking about more about these things and so many other topics. But yeah, thank you, Alistair. And
Excellent.
yeah,